Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
Finally, after the longest budget stalemate in California history, lawmakers come to an agreement. Public schools and public employees are hit hard. The debate on Tuesday between Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Steve Cooley brought out dramatic differences between the candidates for state attorney general.
Absolutely.
And from making it illegal to sit or lie down on sidewalks to adjusting the public employees' pension system, there's no shortage of controversy on the ballot in San Francisco. And we will talk with the authors of California Crackup, how reform broke the Golden State and how we can fix it. Those stories next. Good evening and welcome to This Week in Northern California. I'm Belva Davis. Joining me tonight on our news panel are Rachel Gordon, City Hall reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle; Scott Schaefer, host of the California Report on KQED Public Radio; and Stu Wu, California political reporter with the Wall Street Journal. And we'll start with you, Stu, because you've got the freshest news. And that is that we have a budget. And
the governor signed it just about an hour ago, and it came on day 100 of the fiscal year. We have been operating without a budget for 3 months now, and there's some good news and there's some bad news. The good news is that in the short term, the state might just avoid IOUs this year. The bad news is that, well, this doesn't really fix the problem for the next year, and it might not even actually fix it for this year, because the budget relies on some assumptions that might not go through. For one big thing is that the state is expecting in this budget that the federal government will chip in $5 billion. That's a couple more billion than the Legislative Analyst's Office said they thought they were going to get. And the second thing is that they erased $1.4 billion of the budget just by taking a sunnier forecast of the revenue. So who knows if that'll hold up until June.
These are not unusual things to happen, though, in Sacramento.
They've use these accounting gimmicks every year. And actually this year they used a little bit less, but this means that come the fiscal year 2011, there's still going to be a pretty big budget deficit.
Stu, I heard after it passed, Darrell Steinberg, the Senate President Pro Tem, and John Perez, the relatively new Speaker, saying how good they felt about the budget. Not saying it's not a perfect document, but really it could have been a lot worse. Do Democrats feel like they really got some things they wanted, or is this just another year where they needed to get Republican votes and they basically gave away most of what they really would have liked to keep?
If you look at the original budget, it could have been much worse for Democrats. Arnold wanted $12 billion in cuts. Now it's only 7.5. And it could have been worse for the Republicans, too, but they got away without increasing taxes this year. So everybody got a little of what they wanted. I think the big thing for the Democrats was that Schwarzenegger proposed eliminating CalWORK's Work for Welfare program. And they were able to keep that, even though I just read that Schwarzenegger is going to line item veto about $400 million from that program.
Can you tell us why that program is a favorite of his for cuts?
I think, this year he proposed eliminating it, and I think he did that the year before as well. And Republicans have said all along that California, when you compare it to the rest of the other states per capita, that the state has a lot more welfare benefits than anybody else in the country.
Stu, this budget also relies on employees' unions giving back, right? And then some negotiated agreements that still have to be agreed on by the union members. The leadership says we're confident it will happen. It'll be much worse if they don't ratify. But is there a sense that they are going to follow along with the leadership? How done of a deal is this budget now?
That's always a good question with the California budget. Well, one of the reasons this took so long was that Schwarzenegger said he wouldn't sign this budget if there weren't these budget and pension reforms. And he seems to have gotten them. So he's negotiated with all the major unions, and he actually agreed to a deal with the SEIU, the state's biggest union, saying that any employee hired after early November would have fewer pension benefits than current employees. And this, combined with all the other agreements he's reached with other unions, he says could save the state $100 billion over 30 years.
So that could be a legacy, really.
It could be, but there's not a whole lot to stop the next governor or the governor after that from just doing that all away with the stroke of a pen.
So, I'm sorry. So, present retirees will not be affected. Only those coming in later. Did that help him in getting an agreement with the unions?
That's correct. The unions fought really hard against this, and I think the only reason that Schwarzenegger didn't try to change current pension benefits was that there were some tricky legal obstacles in the way.
What would it take for another legislature and another governor to undo that pension reform?
It wouldn't take a whole lot. One thing that Schwarzenegger does have going for him is that both Jerry Brown and Meg Whitman, running for governor, have said that they've supported these kinds of reforms. So you would think that maybe they wouldn't do away with this when they become governor.
Let me ask you about for the general public in California. What does this mean? When we saw in the last year that there were a lot of furlough days, you wanted to go and pick up a new driver's license, you might go to the DMV office and it's closed. I mean, are we going to see more of that? Are the state parks going to be closed? Are there going to be higher fees we're paying? How will it affect the everyday folks? So in this new budget, there won't be a furlough day. The state employees will take a day off a year, but you won't go to the DMV on Friday and find it closed. And they were able to avoid a lot of the cuts to state parks that Schwarzenegger had originally proposed.
Well, we also didn't talk about education. Was education hit hard?
Yeah, education got about $2 or $3 billion cut from the current year budget. But the good news is that that's money that will have to be repaid over the next couple of years.
And higher ed?
And higher ed I think it has either the exact same budget as it did last year or slightly more.
So, lots yet to learn with the governor signing that bill, though, right away after all of these 100 days. Let's turn now to the elections again, because they're just a few weeks away, and one of the races we haven't talked a great deal about is the Attorney General's race, but they just had a big debate. So, Scott, what's going on with the Attorney General's race?
Well, Steve Cooley, the Republican nominee, the district attorney in Los Angeles, Kamala Harris, the DA here in San Francisco, squared off this weekend. They are as different as night and day, stark differences, yin-yang, whatever metaphor you want to use. And that's one thing they agree on. One of the few things they agree on is how different they are. You can just go right down the list of issues and they disagree, whether it's on the environment, gay rights, death penalty, and they're very different kinds of people. I mean, Cooley is sort of the classic prosecutor. His dad was an FBI agent. Looks like he could have stepped off the set of Dragnet. Kamala Harris, dynamic, young, really kind of beautiful, I think. Cooley probably would not be confused with George Clooney, if you know what I mean. But, just very different in style and substance as well. And so it's really going to be an interesting choice that voters have. This is not two people trying to kind of muddle their differences. They really were very clear in the debate that these two people have very different philosophies, and it'll be interesting to see how the voters evaluate them.
Is this all about law and order and crime? Are there other issues that they're focused on that the Attorney General would do?
Well, Cooley would like it to be about law and order. Certainly in their debate, he went right to the death penalty. He supports it. Kamala Harris personally opposes it for philosophical reasons, although she promises that if she's elected, as Jerry Brown has said, that she would enforce the law. Of course, she has to do that. But Kamala Harris trying to pull it away from that because that's not really her strong suit. She talks a lot about the environment. She created an environmental crime unit in the DA's office, a prosecution unit, and she criticizes him for eliminating a similar kind of thing in Los Angeles. She talks about things that liberal voters or even moderate independent voters care about, things like gay marriage. She has promised to do as the governor and Jerry Brown, the current AG, did, which is to not defend Prop 8 in court. It'll probably be moot by the time either one of them gets elected. Cooley said he would defend it. So, he is trying to bring it back to those law and order issues. She's trying to pull away from those things.
And there are other issues on the ballot, propositions on the ballot, where there is some disagreement.
There is some disagreement and some agreement. Prop 19, which would legalize marijuana in California, almost every elected official has opposed that, and they both oppose it. That's one thing they agree on. Prop 23, which would suspend AB 32, the state's landmark greenhouse gas emission law. Kamala Harris very strongly opposing that. Steve Cooley wouldn't take a position on it, and she kept trying to push him and criticize him. He said, well, look, the Attorney General writes the ballot summary and can be in court on these things. It's not really smart for the AG, the Attorney General, to take positions. Of course, she pointed out that, well, you took a position on Prop 19, but he refused to do it on Prop 23.
Yeah, Harris has been embroiled in a couple of scandals in the past couple of years. How are those going to affect her chances of winning the race?
She has a number of, I would say, serious Achilles heels. First of all, just in her first weeks in office, there was a San Francisco police officer, Isaac Espinoza, who was shot and killed. And even before the funeral, she said she was not going to seek the death penalty, which was consistent with what she had said when she ran. His family, the officer's family, came out with a very powerful statement opposing her candidacy. There have been problems with the San Francisco drug lab, which is under the police department, but her office had been warned about those problems and didn't really take steps to fix it. And there are other issues involving those relations between the police department and the district attorney in San Francisco that could come back to haunt her. And they, interestingly enough, of course, you have to have money to go on television, to have ads to get those points across. And Cooley, in the final weeks, has more cash on hand, about $1.7 million to Harris's 1.3. So he'll have the money to go up on TV. The question is, will it break through in this political season?
And Cooley, the Republican, has done quite well in Los Angeles, which is not really the most conservative area of the state, Los Angeles proper. How has he kind of crossed over, do you think, to the voters?
Well, he defeated a Democrat in 2002, Gil Garcetti, and then he got reelected with 59% of the vote. And then this last time around in 2008, didn't even have any opposition. But one thing he's done, one of a number of things he's done to sort of reach out to moderate voters, I guess, is that he's taken a very nuanced position on 3 strikes and you're out. He has more selectively sought a third strike in cases where he felt it was really called for, and that actually he caught a lot of flack for that in the Republican primary from more conservative candidates who felt he was being soft on crime, and he's gotten some national publicity on that as well. So that's
any polling done?
A bit of polling shows the race, I would say, close. Field poll had Cooley up by, I believe, 7. The Public Policy Institute showed it more close, but a very large number of undecided voters. So really very much up in the air going into the final 3.5 weeks.
So stay tuned for any debates or other things that will help. Well, they've really clarified their positions. It's just up to voters now to make up their mind.
Exactly.
Well, making up your mind in San Francisco is always a challenge because sometimes you don't think there's a board of supervisors over there. There's a very long ballot in San Francisco this time, covering many issues. Rachel Gordon, give us an idea.
Well, let's start with pension reform. We were just talking about that at the state, and there's one measure that's probably the most contentious. A lot of money's being poured into that. That's Proposition B, and this was put on the ballot by initiative, carried by someone who had been the champion and the kind of the darling of the left, public defender Jeff Adachi, is coming out very strong against organized labor on this. He wants to set into the city charter, the city's kind of Bible, saying that we want city employees to pay more into their pension system. They also want them to pay more for health benefits in San Francisco. The organized labor has come out very, very strong against this, as well as most but not all of the elected officials. Mayor Gavin Newsom is saying this is not the way to go about pension and health care reform, even though it's an extremely large cost for the city. He said it's better to do this at the bargaining table. Jeff Adachi, though, is saying enough is enough. The costs have just kept skyrocketing. We have to draw the line somewhere. This is a way to do it. If we have more savings here, we can put more savings into city programs and other areas that San Francisco taxpayers have been picking up the bill for a long time. It's a fascinating race to watch. I kind of look at it as San Francisco's Tea Party movement in a way. If voters vote yes in favor of this proposal, Proposition B, it might show that the people have generally pulled the strings. The Democratic Party, labor unions are really losing kind of a lot of the luster, at least in this issue for pocketbook issue.
And it also says something about the position of labor if they lose this big one.
Absolutely. Labor has always been so strong in San Francisco.
One notable exception to those elected officials or former elected officials who are opposing Prop B, Willie Brown came out in support of it, as did Matt Gonzalez, a former Green Party supervisor. What's up with that?
It's the same thing. The pension has just gotten out of control. Now, Matt Gonzalez and Jeff Adachi have been longtime allies, friends. And I think Matt Gonzalez, when he was actually sworn in at the Board of Supervisors in 2000 and then took over as board president, he said that the progressives have to remake who they are. They can't just be kind of banning plastic bags and environmental issues, that they have to get to pocketbook issues, to populist issues, and this might be a way to kind of reset what the progressive movement's about.
Well, let's go down the ballot a little more. There are other.
Okay, let's do one more labor issue that's the hot button issue in San Francisco, and that's Proposition G, which would change the way that muni operators get paid. Right now, they are guaranteed the second highest wage of transit operators in the nation. They make a little under $30 an hour. It's guaranteed again in the city charter. What this does, another initiative drive in San Francisco, is it says take that out of the city charter, have them go to the bargaining table, and if you're able to do that, then the management would have more leverage to get changes on work rules, everything from discipline, scheduling, absenteeism. Right now, management's hands are tied. They don't really have a lot of leverage because if you can't negotiate pay, you can't negotiate a lot of things.
But isn't that because there used to be so many incidents of muni workers walking off the job, tiring up the city? Wasn't this the compromise?
Right, and that was decades ago. I mean, this has been in the charter for about 40 years. There is a prohibition against going on strike in San Francisco if you're a muni operator. There's no prohibition, though, against sick-outs, really, or slowing down the work rules. So
are there any legal problems with changing a labor contract at the ballot box? I mean, this is something that, especially with Prop B, that has been agreed to at the bargaining table.
A lot of people are saying with Prop B, again, the pension health benefits ordinance, that there might be real legal obstacles there. Jeff Adachi is confident that it will withstand the legal test. In fact, a part of it has already been struck down by the court. He's going forward with aspects that the court has not struck down yet.
Yeah, with the Muni proposition, how will actual San Franciscans be affected by this? If it passes, can they expect better service?
That's a $100,000 question, or with Muni, what's the budget? Almost $750 million question. There's a possibility for better service, unless you have really cranky and grumpy drivers who don't want to be dumped on anymore, saying, look, we're the ones, we have one of the toughest jobs in the city. There's 700,000 boardings a day. Don't beat up on us. Look at other ways to do reform. But they're saying if there are changes to the work rules, then there might see improvement in muni
We
service.
have to go to sit-lie law.
Okay, so there are two quality of life issues on the ballot, Propositions L and M, and they have to be looked at together. Proposition L, very strongly backed by Mayor Gavin Newsom, put on the ballot, backed by Chief George Gascon, the police chief, would ban, as you said earlier in the show, sitting or lying on the sidewalk in San Francisco between the hours of 7 a.m. and 11 p.m. Now, a police officer could come by and say, stand up, and could do nothing about it. Someone could just stand up, and that's it. This, of course, is opposed by the left-leaning members of the Board of Supervisors. It's very much championed by the business community, and the heart of it started in the Haight-Ashbury, where some of the residents and business owners just got fed up with people hanging out on the sidewalks with their dogs there. Opponents say there are plenty of laws already on the books, everything from aggressive panhandling to loitering, that the police could use in their toolbox, and they're just not using them.
And that is as far as we get to go, Rachel. We thank you so much. So there are other interesting items on your ballot, so check those ballot books if you're living in San Francisco and trying to figure it out. Well, my thanks to Rachel, and my thanks to all of you for joining us here tonight. We'll be devoting our entire program to the campaigns and the ballot measures in our election special on Friday night, October 22nd, so be sure to tune in for that. And coming up, a conversation with the authors of California Crackup, How Reform Broke the Golden State and How We Can Fix It. Well, is California beyond repair? Budget crises and partisan gridlock in Sacramento led many Californians to believe the answer is yes. In a new book called California Crackup, author Joe Matthews and Mark Paul explore what is wrong with our state and how we can fix it, and they join us now. So welcome, and let's see if in our time you can explain to us how we got to be in the state that we're in today. You want to start with it?
Sure. I mean, the crack up to us means we're in a spot not just that where we have all these problems in education and prisons and water and healthcare, but that we have improvised our way over 160 years, and particularly in the last 30 years with lots of voter-approved measures, into a place where we can't even govern ourselves. We can't make progress on these issues that we know are problems.
Mark, how did that happen?
Well, it's largely because California has never had a real founding. The state got people came here in a hurry back in the gold rush. We've been getting ultimately through boom and bust, getting rich, and we've never really crafted a government equal to the size of the state, the population of the state, and we keep trying, as Joe said, these improvised silver bullets of reform to try to get through a problem to the next boom. And we finally reached the end of the line that California has gotten itself a system that's at war with itself, that doesn't work because it can't work. It's a very radical, improvised system that no other state tries to use.
What are some of the reforms that we're talking about here? What do we do?
Well, I mean, our diagnosis first is that there are sort of three systems here: an election system that's designed to produce majorities, a consensus governing system of 2/3 supermajorities that amount to minority rule. Those two don't fit together, and then this very inflexible initiative system. And the broad strokes is we need to take those three systems, which are at war with each other, and integrate them into one. So what we propose an election, a different kind of election system that involves in a much different shaped legislature, a unicameral, many more people in it, and elections that involve multi-member districts for the legislature rather than single-member districts, where proportional representation can be used to give people the real sense that they can change the shape of the legislature and that every vote counts. Right now, we don't have real legislative elections. We all know today who's going to win. It'll be the Democrats in the same numbers they have now.
Do you agree with that? Of course you agree. That's your book.
Well, fixing the election system, and then once we have a legislature that we can hold accountable, that is more representative of California, then we can do a second big thing, which is to take out all those 2/3 vote requirements that we have about budgets and taxes and school funding guarantees and transportation. I mean, one of the reasons we're so unhappy with the legislature is because with the legislature, we've taken away all their flexibility to govern. And we've imposed the 2/3 requirements so that the budget that was just passed and signed today belongs to nobody. It's not the Democrats' budget. They didn't like it. It's not the Republicans' budget. They didn't like it. It's not the governor's budget. It is a budget that belongs to no one because we require this consensus system. We'd be better off changing the legislature, making it more accountable, and then actually letting the legislature govern.
Those seem like two things that are near impossible, given the structure of the people who'd have to make the changes. Is it possible? Is there a way around?
I think it is. I mean, it requires doing something California has never done before, which is really sort of start from scratch, look at its systems, and create something coherent. But, you know, and it's difficult because public opinion is so confused. People don't have an understanding of how state government works. But I do think that when you have a system that's this perverse, this radical, you know, with supermajority systems that no other state uses, an initiative and referendum system that no other state or country uses, when people come to understand how strange and perverse the status quo is, moving to a system, you know, based on ideas and things that work in other places is a pretty moderate, simple, you know, vanilla kind of thing to do.
You're talking about elections of a different sort, more people in the legislature. Can you explain that a little more? What would happen?
Well, under our current system, and think here in the Bay Area, I mean, all of the Assembly and Senate seats are controlled by Democrats because this is a very heavily Democratic area. And Republicans in the Bay Area might as well not vote because they know that their votes really don't count. And the same is true in reverse in the inland areas of California that are more heavily Republican. The Democrats really don't count. Under the kind of system we're talking about with proportional representation, every vote everywhere counts. If you're a Republican in the Bay Area and come out and vote for a Republican, it moves your party one bit closer to having an extra seat to possibly control the legislature, and vice versa. And the result of our current system now is that we don't, you know, we have a legislative election next month, but nobody's paying any attention to it. They're not focusing on the issues because none of the elections are really competitive.
Why do you say it doesn't count, though?
Well, it counts in terms of who's in the legislature, but we know the results already because of the way in California we're sorted into blue and red in districts that are not competitive.
So the district lines are here. The culprit?
Was the part of the culprit, and the way we sort ourselves by choosing where we live in California. A proportional system gets rid of those kinds of problems.
Well, I think there's an audience out there would like any formula that gets rid of those kind of problems, and so it's been great to hear your insight on what California can do to fix itself. Thanks so much, both of you, Joe and Mark. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Next week, a Climate Watch conversation with Dan Common, UC Berkeley energy expert who's been named head of energy policy for the World Bank. Be sure to visit kqed.org/thisweek to watch our show online and comment on our stories. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.